Day 26. I'm smiling again. Isn't that delightful? I think so too. Thanks for noticing. Yeah, so I went through some really tough times past few days. Woke up this morning with a thought, and I just counted off all the people who had died that were important to me. Grandpa, Grandma, Cousin Greg, Mom, 2 miscarriages. And I felt that as I laid there in bed this morning, and I allowed it. And I held on to each of them for a moment of love. Thanked God for where I am in life, making it so far that I have. And I got up, checked a message. I'm still doing this thing where I'm checking messages on my phone before I do the meditation, and I see that it's getting in the way of my practice, and I can feel that I'm really close to letting go of that too. I did it again though. I've been reaching out to a lot of people in these online grief support groups on Facebook. I even created my own group earlier this week. I believe I mentioned in one of these other videos. And just a lot of these messages that I'm getting from people, it's really interesting because some of them even can be quite active sharers in some of these Facebook groups. And then if I send them a message, I used to say, feel free to send me a message if you need to chat. Nobody's doing that, okay? I think a lot of people who are dealing with grief, many of them already just feel like they're a burden on other people. They've been conditioned through their experiences in life that nobody wants to hear how sad and how much pain and how their grief is so overwhelming. Maybe in the first 2 weeks after somebody died, okay, yeah, they can be some support. And then once that initial period the person just died is over, the average person doesn't want to or doesn't know how to be present for your pain. And that's okay. There's no judgment about that. I'm just pointing it out. And so I think a lot of these people, if I tell them, you can feel free to message me if you want to chat about this at all, most of them probably would not send a message because they're afraid or they're ashamed or they feel it's a burden or whatever. So I messaged this one lady because I realized that it's probably not, she was not going to message me if I told her she could, because she'd even been posting about, she would apologize for posting too much in the Facebook group. How is it too much to share about your grief? If you need to talk about it, get it out. There is no limit. There's no timeline. Oh, you should be over this by now. Shit. If your mom died, take as long as you need, okay? It's been 11 years now since my mom died. It'll be 11 years in November, and I'm still not over it, okay? I still haven't gotten over her death. I don't know if I ever will. I don't know if that's even a thing. But all day yesterday, I was just swimming in this grief and sadness and just feeling terrible. And I went out to eat with my wife. I talked about this a little bit in last night's video already. And I just talked a lot at the table, and I'm sitting there, this little voice in my head telling me she doesn't want to hear it. What are you doing talking about this stuff? Just stop it. But I couldn't stop. I just kept talking about these different things that I've been experiencing, things I've read in a book, things I noticed in these Facebook groups. And then at some point the energy just shifted. I went from being sad and depressed and just feeling like crap to suddenly being happy and optimistic and like feeling good in that moment, talking about things that I wanted to do, things that I care about. And I can't put my finger on the point when it changed, but it was just like one of those, oh my gosh, what just happened moments when I realized that I had gone from that place of darkness into the feeling of light afterwards. Because I stayed with it, because I allowed myself to have those feelings, and I allowed myself to express these feelings into words. And so there's no timeline. I've been reading this book. It's okay to not be okay by, I can't remember her name, Miss Devine. And the book's wonderful. Okay, after I experienced these losses, first my grandpa, then my mom, and later my cousin, ectopic pregnancies, it was after actually my wife had the miscarriage and the ectopic pregnancy. There was the first time that I decided to read a book about loss and grief. This one was specifically about infertility, actually. I never finished the book. Now that I think about it, it would definitely be worth going back to read it. Or maybe it did. I don't remember. I tried reading that in this period. It was very hard to focus. It was really hard to focus on this book. And that's interesting. I didn't understand why it felt so hard to just get through that book, even though it seemed like it was helping me. And in this other book, It's Okay to Not Be Okay, it talks about how your body goes through these like actual physiological changes when you're experiencing grief. And suddenly, like, it was like my whole life just made sense to me. Now, I had these experiences when I was a child, growing up in a home where I often felt unsafe. My mom would get into arguments with my dad and she would yell a lot, and I would lay there in bed scared, just listening in the room with my sister. Sometimes look over at her. We couldn't speak. I couldn't speak. I don't think she would speak either. We just lay there listening. I was in so much fear over what was going on. What was my fear? I think the biggest fear that I had when I was listening to those arguments was a combination of two things, that I was afraid my parents would get divorced, and I was afraid that if that happened, that maybe it meant that they didn't love me or that it was somehow my fault. And I've seen a lot of people who have had their parents get divorced when they were young children that often experienced thoughts like that. So I understand that's completely normal, but it's very difficult. And as I got older, I noticed that I often had a hard time focusing on things and remembering things and completing basic tasks. And I never considered what was going on about that. My mom was frustrated because, as much as like my mom could be very abusive in the way that she would yell at my dad and yell at me sometimes, but I always know that my mom loved me and did the best that she could. And so she was very concerned about my performance in school, the way that I would just not do well. Okay, I would get poor grades. I would not do my homework. Sometimes I knew I had to do homework, and I would like lie to my parents and tell them there was none because I didn't want to do it. And sometimes I would literally forget. I'd forget that I had homework to get done, and I would get papers lost in my backpack because I was so, it was either consciously avoiding doing the homework or subconsciously avoiding it by forgetting that it was there and stuffing these things down deep into that bottomless bag. And my parents were always very busy with their own work and trying to survive and take care of us, and so they were a lot more actively involved in my life or my school life than I know many other children experienced. But that didn't mean that they were, checking every day, like, let's go through your backpack. Maybe it was a privacy thing. Maybe my mom wanted to respect my privacy and not go dig through my stuff every day. But yeah, I would get these things, they'd be lost. And I went to go see I remember going to see a therapist in high school, and before that, I forget exactly when I had been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD or something like this. And they prescribed me some medication. I think it was like Ritalin or Adderall, one of those two. And I felt like crap. Uh, I just felt like agitated, kind of anxious. I lost my appetite. I tried it for a few days. I don't remember how long, a week or two maybe. And I told my mom, I said, "Mom, I hate this." I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I begged her, I said, "Please, I don't like this medicine. It's not helping me." And there wasn't any like bargaining. It wasn't like I'll be a good child now. I'll finally do well in school. Or I just told her, I said, "No, I can't do this. It makes me feel awful." She said, "Okay, fine, we'll stop." And I remember, I think I was in high school perhaps, when they decided that maybe it would help if I saw a therapist because I just wasn't doing very well in high school. It may have been the time when I'd started smoking weed and drinking. It probably was. I think so, because I remember going to the therapist and just like, I don't know, I didn't want to be open with this guy. I guess I didn't trust him. Looking back, I'm sure he was probably like a really great guy. Like, I didn't have like a bad feeling about him. I just had this general like lack of trust in authority. I feel like I didn't trust my parents, and that extended into like lack of trust in general with other people who were older or in authority positions. And I recall probably lying about my drug and alcohol use with this guy. Maybe I had, mentioned it in passing, but I could definitely not be open with this therapist. Not in the way that I would have needed to actually get some like meaningful benefit from it. And I guess it was probably covered by insurance or something for my dad's work. I don't know. But I tried a couple sessions and I told my parents that this is not working either. It's not helping. I feel like it's just a waste of time. And I don't know, maybe it helped. Looking back, I can't say that there was like a specific benefit of it, but it didn't hurt me. And so I'm grateful that, they had done that in an attempt to provide support for me. And I love that. I really appreciate everything that my parents did to help me. But the fact is, I went through most of my life just really struggling to focus and stay organized, complete tasks, know where my things were, know what I had to do. And it got worse after my grandpa died, the year after I graduated college in 2010. And it got so much worse after my mom died in 2011. There were many days I couldn't even get out of bed. I think I probably would get up to pee. And after using the toilet, I'd be back in bed. And I would pretty much spend all day in bed. I really feel like there were some times where I basically couldn't do anything but lay in bed for the day. And then the night would pass and I would continue. I don't know. Days. I don't think it was weeks. I mean, those toughest moments were just in bed. And it might be a week or more before I would shower. Days without brushing my teeth, probably. I remember all these times that I would like lose my glasses and my keys. And I used to think there was something wrong with me. Like, how can you always forget things so much? And reading this book, I am learning that this is actually very common for people experiencing grief. And I'm guessing that it's actually a result of the trauma and and abuse that I had experienced, this verbal abuse as a child. My difficulty in, completing things like getting a shower or like, you know, go getting a job or shopping, or it was just like my life felt almost impossible after my mom died. And it wasn't just in the following weeks, but it was in the months and even the few years after my mom died. It really took about 3 years before I was able to not get back to normal, but when I was able to like function on some level as a so-called productive member of society. And it was like right as I was getting better was when I met my cousin Greg. And after he died, just brought on a whole new level of pain and grief and confusion and lost focus and like lost sense of purpose in life when I was just feeling like I could manage things again after my mom. I knew that he was in like a whole heap of trouble when we first met, and I felt like what I needed to do, what I wanted to do, was work with him. That I had gained enough skills after my mom died that I believed that I could be of benefit to him, and I was actually. I was of true benefit to him, and I grew a lot at that, but it also came at a big personal sacrifice to myself. My physical health suffered, my mental health suffered for sure, and part of that was just because he had died, so it's not like, his fault or whatever, or my fault, but that was the outcome. And then there was the whole thing in Thailand afterwards, and losing a bunch of money, and getting into that relationship that didn't really serve me at all, even from the beginning, although I thought it did. And then getting into this relationship now with my wife in China. And there's like little things that I forget sometimes. And she would be upset with me. And I always think to myself, like, why do I keep forgetting this stuff? Some of these things are little things, but important. I remember my dad, too. My dad would always tell me, make sure you shut the windows if you're leaving the home, okay? If you're the only one there, you leave the home, make sure you shut the windows. We would always leave the air windows open because, better airflow, and usually the air quality is pretty good enough in Long Beach, close to the beach where we are there. And my dad was worried that of like a break-in, maybe, security reasons. Make sure you shut the windows when you leave. And sometimes I would forget. Maybe many times. I don't know. I don't have a count, but probably dozens of times I forgot to shut the windows in my dad's home. And doing some of this stuff here in Harbin, China, I told my wife that, maybe we can just put a sign on the wall that says, do this. It's like, there's like a shut the sink. I'm not going to explain it. Just shut the sink. And she said, no, I'm not going to do that. This is not a hotel. But I read in this book, actually, the author was saying that in some cases, people actually need to put signs all over their house just to help them remember things like lock the door, your keys go here, whatever it is. And it was like, oh my God, you mean I'm not the only one that experiences stuff like this? And it's just a light bulb went off in my mind reading this book this week, that after everything I've been through, like, yeah, this is totally okay where I'm at. all the mistakes I've made, all the screw ups, all the failures, all the losses, some of these, somewhat of my own doing as far as financial decisions and relationships, and then some of this that was outside of my direct control, the, loss of a relative to death. It's created this whole mix of things going on inside me that has what made it very difficult to function at different times. Even now, after the miscarriages earlier this year, I felt like I couldn't get anything done anymore. And I know it wasn't just those. The miscarriages were it was like how do they say, the straw that broke the camel's back, right? It was the years of grief and loss that I had not expressed as well as I could have along the way. And finally, I saw that it just became impossible. It became impossible to go on in the way that I had before, and I totally broke down. And as I was going through this trouble in my job earlier this year and began meditating daily, I cried every day. I cried deeply, and my whole body shook. And just every day for a month, I cried. Took a break when we went to Guangzhou. Back in Harbin, I started meditating. I wasn't ready. I played video games every day for hours. And then finally I said, you know what? It's time to face this. Began the meditations again. Daily crying came back. I don't cry every day now, but still cry every week. And I love that because it's helping me to do what I need to do. Like, okay, so if I try and compare myself on the outside and say, yeah, but, I don't have a successful business like I want to. I don't have as much money saved as I wanted to before I went back to the US. But it's not about the external situation. Because if I'm just looking at that and say none of these are where I should be, that's totally discounting the fact that I've done so much on the inside. So much of the work that I've been doing has been happening mentally and emotionally and energetically. And sometimes we don't see the immediate results of that. But I know that something is happening on these days when I sleep for 12 hours. On these days where I have this voice that tells me I should do some work about money. And then I say, yeah, I hear you. I need to take care of myself. The money will take care of itself. Currently, the most important thing is to tend to myself. Self-care has become mostly a full-time job, in the sense it's the thing that I'm most committed to, doing these daily meditations, recording these YouTube videos. I've been drinking this wheatgrass juice powder pretty much daily, drinking more water, really taking the steps to care for myself, exercise, time in nature, reading the books about these topics of grief and support, watching YouTube videos about meditation and expansion and how to connect with my soul. And all this is building, and I'm doing what I need to do because as I said earlier, it's been almost 11 years since my mom died, and I didn't get over it. I'm still not over it. And that's okay. There's no timeline to grief. It's not like you get 2 weeks after the person dies and then you should be okay. By the way, after my after my wife's miscarriage and ectopic pregnancy earlier this year, I went back to work almost immediately afterwards. And I knew that I was delaying the grief. I cried every day that last month of work as I was meditating daily. And mostly I was crying about the messed up situation I was in, having to like then deal with physical abuse from a 5-year-old child, which like I didn't know was a thing before, but it actually is. Go look it up online. There's stories of teachers in the US who have kindergarten teachers who have gone to the hospital because they were attacked by 5-year-old children. Like, I had shut down my time to process grief for a little bit longer. And I also know that sometimes denial of grief can be a valuable skill short term. Okay, there might be situations where you just have to block off these thoughts and feelings, but as a long term solution, it's very, I don't know if dangerous is the word, very detrimental to your health. Long term denial of grief could destroy you. I tried to do that for many years, even as I thought that I was grieving, and I was. But there was this whole like deeper level to it that I couldn't access before. So like I know it's hard. It's hard to be kind to yourself because you know everything. You know all the mistakes you've ever made. You know all your shortcomings. You know all your fears and anxieties. So you can beat yourself up about all that, or you can give yourself self-care and love and compassion and move towards wellness. Even if it's just drinking an ounce of extra water a day, even if it's sleeping for 15 minutes more, even if it's taking a deep breath. Now, I know that for some people, actually, I'm learning this now too, that sometimes meditation and breathing might not be effective, especially in the early stages of grief when you just feel so overwhelmed over the fact that your person has physically died and for example they're no longer even able to breathe themselves. That might be like too triggering for you. So there's no like right way to grieve. It's no one size fits all as far as specific skills or techniques, but the like idea behind it I think is universal. Everything I've learned in life tells me that this is universal because it's not just specific to grief, but this is what I've experienced with life in general, is that every moment we have a choice either to allow or resist. We have a choice of harm or compassion. We have a choice of moving closer to God or away from God. And so every choice that you make, ask yourself, is this helping me? Is this an act of love? Is this an act of self-care? And if it's not, and you have to do it anyway, I get that because that's the way that this works. You can't like orchestrate your own breakthrough. For most people, you probably can't like quit smoking cold turkey. You gotta become something greater. If I want to care for myself and be kind and be supportive in my grief, what do I have to become in order to do that? What do I have to become in order to be the space of love? So I'm going to leave you with that. Be kind to yourself. Love, be love. Be patience. Be compassion. Thank you. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. I see you. I know that it's really hard sometimes, but you're doing the best that you can. And even when it feels like that's just totally insufficient, on an energetic level, it's still enough. Even if in this physical realm it feels like it's not enough. If you're homeless, you got, massive debt, your family's all turned against you, you're still doing the best that you can. And life is hard enough as it is. So be that space of compassion.